The fifth learning outcome deals with troubleshooting problems with the motherboard, processor, and RAM. Replacing the bad component with the good one is not always the best solution. You might miss the real source of a problem. That is why it's important to first check the simple things. The motherboard and the processor are expensive and time-consuming to replace. It's important before you declare they are the source of the problem that you first eliminate other components as the source of the problem. Most of the hardware and software problems can be solved using some of the following tools: the antivirus software to remove viruses, memory diagnostic tools to solve memory problems, the device manager for most of the hardware or device problems, Windows updates and patches and event viewer logs to trace events occurred in your system. The startup repair utility serves as a one-stop do-it-all option. When run, it performs a number of repairs. Windows 10 starts the startup repair automatically after several restarts. If the startup repair doesn't automatically start, the following steps might be used to start the startup process. You can change boot priority order and boot from the optical DVD or CD drive or USB drive. When booted from the startup repair disk, follow through the wizard to repair the system. System Restore does the same job here it has done since Microsoft first introduced it in Windows ME, enabling you to go back to a time when your computer worked properly. Placing this option in Windows RE gives those of us who make many restore points snapshots of a system at a given point of time, a quick and handy way to return our systems to a previous state. If Windows fails to start up normally, press F5 at boot up to boot directly to safe mode. Or in Windows Vista or Windows 7, you can use the Windows Advanced Startup Options menu to discover the cause. To get to this menu, restart the computer and press F8 after the post messages, but before the Windows logo screen appears. Safe mode starts up Windows but loads only very basic non-vendor specific drivers for mouse, which is 800 by 600 for Vista and Windows 7, or 1024 by 768 for Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 resolution monitor for keyboard, mass storage, and system services. Once in safe mode, you can use tools such as Device Manager to locate and correct the source of the problem. When you use Device Manager in safe mode, you can access the properties for all the devices, even those that are not working in safe mode. The status displayed for the device is the status for a normal startup. Even the network card will show as enabled. You can disable any suspect device or perform other tasks such as removing or updating drivers. If a problem with the device driver is preventing the operating system from starting normally, check Device Manager for warning icons that indicate unknown device. This mode is identical to plain safe mode except that you get network support. It is used to test for a problem with network drivers. If Windows won't start up normally, but does start up in safe mode, reboot into safe mode with networking. If it fails to start up with networking, the problem is a network driver. Reboot back to safe mode, open Device Manager, and start disabling network components, beginning with the network adapter. When you start Windows in this mode, rather than loading the GUI desktop, it loads the command prompt as the shell to the operating system after you log on. From here, you can run any of the commands, plus a lot of utilities as well. Error checking runs fine as check disk, for example. Disk defragmenter probably runs even faster when you type defrag followed by a drive letter at the command prompt than it does from the graphic version of the tool. Safe mode with command prompt is a handy option to remember if the desktop doesn't display at all, which after you have eliminated video drivers can be caused by corruption of the Explorer.exe program. From the command prompt, you can delete the corrupted version of Explorer.exe and copy in an undamaged version. This requires knowing the command line commands for navigating the directory structure, as well as knowing the location of the file you are replacing. Although Explorer is not loaded, you can load other GUI tools that don't depend on Explorer. All you have to do is enter the correct command. For instance, to load Event Viewer, type event vwr.msc at the command line and press enter. This option starts Windows normally and creates a log file of the drivers as they load into memory. The file is named ntbtlog.txt and is saved in the system root folder. If the startup failed because of a bad driver, the last entry in this file may be the driver the operating system was initialized when it failed. Reboot and go into the WinRE. Use the tools there to read the boot log and disable or enable problematic devices or services. Enable low resolution mode starts Windows normally, but only loads a default VGA driver. If this mode works, it may mean you have a bad driver, or it may mean you are using the correct video driver, but it is configured incorrectly, perhaps with the wrong refresh rate or resolution. Whereas safe mode loads a generic VGA driver, this mode loads the driver Windows is configured to use, but starts it up in standard VGA mode rather than using the settings for which it is configured. After successfully starting in this mode, open the display applet and change the settings. When Windows startup fails immediately after installing a new driver, but before you have logged on again, try the last known good configuration option. This option applies specifically to new device drivers that cause failures on reboot. The title says it all here. This option only applies to Active Directory domain controllers, and only Windows Server versions can be domain controllers. If you choose it, you simply boot into safe mode. If you select this choice, Windows starts in kernel debug mode. It's a super techy thing to do, and I doubt that even Uber techs do debug mode anymore. To do this, you have to connect the computer you are debugging to another computer via a serial connection. And as Windows starts up, a debug of the kernel is sent to the second computer, which must also be running in a debugger program. Sometimes a blue screen of death will appear at startup, causing your computer to spontaneously reboot. That's all well and good, but if it happens too quickly, you might not be able to read the blue screen of death to see what caused the problem. Selecting Disable Automatic Restart on System Failure from the Advanced Startup Options menu stops the computer from rebooting on Stop Errors. This gives you the opportunity to write down the error and hopefully find a fix. Windows requires that all very low-level drivers, that is kernel drivers, must have a Microsoft driver signature. If you are using an older driver to connect to your hard drive controller or some other low-level feature, you must use this option to get Windows to load the driver. Hopefully, you will always check your motherboard and hard drives for Windows compatibility and never have to use this option. This choice will simply start Windows normally without rebooting. You already rebooted to get to this menu. Select this if you changed your mind about using any of the other exotic choices. This choice will actually do a soft reboot of the computer. On computers with multiple operating systems, you get an operating system choices menu to select which operating systems to load. If you load Windows and press F8 to get the advanced setup option menu, you will see this option. Choosing it returns you to the operating system choices menu, from which you can select the operating system to load. Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 and Windows 10 display a blue screen with a sad face and the words to the effect of Windows has a problem. Restart the machine. Mac operating system X will display a spinning rainbow wheel called the pinwheel of death. The response is the same. Reboot the machine. Bad RAM sometimes triggers a non-maskable interrupt known as NMI, although often the culprit lies with buggy programming or clashing code. The blue screen of death varies according to the operating system, and it would require a much lengthier work than this one to cover all the variations. Suffice it to say that RAM could be the problem when that delightful blue screen appears. Finally, intermittent memory errors can come from a variety of sources, including a dying power supply, electrical interference, buggy applications, buggy hardware, and so on. These errors show up as lockups, general protection faults, page faults, and parity errors, but they never have the same address or happen with the same applications. I always check the power supply first. Once you discover that you may have a RAM problem, you have a couple of options. First, several companies manufacture hardware RAM testing devices. Second, you can use the method I use, replace and pray. Open the system case and replace each stick one at a time with a known good replacement stick. You have one of those lying around, don't you? This method, although potentially time-consuming, certainly works. With PC prices as low as they are now, you could simply replace the whole system for less than the price of dedicated RAM tester. Third, you could run a software-based tester on the RAM. Because you have to load a software test into the memory it's about to scan, there's always a small chance that simply starting the software RAM tester might cause an error. Troubleshooting a potential motherboard failure requires time, patience, and organization. Some problems will certainly be quicker to solve than the others. If the hard drive doesn't work as expected, as in the previous example, check the settings on the drive. Try a different drive. Try the same drive with a different motherboard to verify that it's a good drive. Like every other troubleshooting technique, what you are trying to do with motherboard testing is to isolate the problem by eliminating potential causes. Use a modern postcard with a good diagnostic screen. You will find cards that plug into both PCI and PCIe slots for example, and even USB-based postcards that enable quick diagnostic tests on portable computers. This three-part system, check, replace, verify good component, works both the simple and more complicated motherboard problems. Once you determine that the motherboard has problems, you have several options for fixing the three types of failures. If you have a catastrophic failure, you must replace the motherboard. Even if it works somewhat, don't mess around. The motherboard should provide bedrock stability for the system. If it's even remotely buggy or problematic, get rid of it. We have now come to the end of chapter 4. Coming up next is chapter 5, where we will be covering hard drives and other storage devices.